The Forsaken Princess. The sky above was dark, filled with swirling red clouds that rumbled like an angry beast. The planet Zindra was dying. Once, it had been the heart of the mighty Zintari Empire, a world of towering spires and endless cities. But now, the great cities were nothing more than broken ruins. Firestorms raged across the land, and the air was thick with dust and ash. The Empire had abandoned this world. And they had abandoned her. Princess Skyra lay on the cold ground, her body weak, her breathing shallow. Her people had left days ago, escaping to the stars, fleeing from war and destruction. She had watched their ships rise into the sky, their bright engines disappearing into the void. But they had not taken her. She was crippled, born with twisted legs that could not support her weight. In Zintari culture, strength was everything. The weak were left behind. She had known this day would come, but it still hurt. Her food supplies were gone. The air was growing thinner. Soon, she would die. Perhaps it was better this way. But then she heard something strange, a deep, rumbling sound. It was not the wind. It was not thunder. It was a ship. Zyra's dark, silver eyes widened as she looked up. Through the thick clouds, she saw something descending, a human ship. Her heart pounded in fear. The humans had arrived. For years, the Zintari had spoken of humans as nothing more than pests, barbarians who spread across the galaxy like a disease. They were a young race, reckless and unpredictable. They had no great empire, no legendary history. They did not have the strength of the Zintari or the intelligence of the Scythus scientists. And yet, the humans were feared. They were a species that did not surrender, a species that refused to die. Zyra struggled to move, crawling with weak arms as she watched the ship land nearby. Dust rose around it, covering the cracked ground in a thick cloud. The ship was small, but its metal hull was strong, built for battle. The engines hissed as they cooled, and then silence. A few moments later, the hatch opened, and they stepped out. The humans. They wore armor, but it was not elegant like the Zintari battle suits. It was rough, practical, built for survival. Their faces were hidden behind helmets, but she could hear their voices, deep, calm, steady. They moved with confidence, like creatures who had faced death many times before and refused to bow to it. One of them, a tall man with a thick build, stepped forward and scanned the area. His gaze fell on her, and for a long moment he said nothing. Then he spoke. "She's alive." His voice was not harsh like she expected. It was concerned. Another human, smaller and faster, rushed forward. "No way. A Zintari. Out here." "She's not a soldier," the tall man said. He knelt beside Zyra, his gloved hand reaching out carefully. "She's injured." Zyra flinched, expecting cruelty. But the human did not strike her. He did not grab her roughly or show disgust like her own people had. Instead, he lifted her gently. Her mind spun with confusion. This was wrong. Humans were supposed to be killers, monsters. Yet this one was helping her. "Stay back," she whispered, her voice weak. "If my people return, they will kill you." The human chuckled. "If your people come back, I'll be sure to thank them for leaving you behind." His words stung, but they were true. Why were they helping? The humans carried her into their ship, placing her on a soft surface. She had never felt such comfort before. The humans gave her water, and she drank greedily. Her throat burned, but it was a good pain. One of them, a woman with short black hair, scanned her with a strange device. "Her body's weak. If we don't help, she won't last long." The tall man nodded. "Then we help." Zyra stared at them. "Why?" They exchanged glances, as if the answer was obvious. Finally, the man shrugged. "Because we can." She did not understand. Her own people had left her, yet these strangers, these barbarians, were treating her like she mattered. She wanted to ask more, but exhaustion pulled her into darkness. As she drifted into unconsciousness, she heard one last thing. "She's not dead yet," the human woman said. "And if she stays with us, she won't be." Cliffhanger. The unknown threat. Thyra awoke to the sound of alarms. The human chip trembled as warning lights flashed red. The voices of the humans were no longer calm. They were alert. Ready. "What's happening?" Kyra asked, forcing herself to sit up. The tall human turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Your people," he said grimly. "They're back. A species that defies logic." The ship trembled, metal groaning under unseen pressure. Alarms blared in sharp, urgent cries, flashing red across the dimly lit control room. Kyra sat up sharply, her body weak, but her mind alert. She wasn't alone anymore. The humans had taken her in, saved her. But now, the Zentari had returned. Had they come for her? No, her people didn't come back for the weak. They had come for something else. Humans do not fear death. The tall human, she had learned his name was Captain Reed, stood at the center of the chaos, his face calm despite the flashing warnings. His crew moved quickly, their voices filled with tension but not fear. "Status?" he asked, his voice like iron. The woman with short black hair, who the others called Dr. Hayes, glanced at a screen. "Zentari warship. Class unknown, but they're scanning us." Cyrus' stomach twisted. A Zentari warship was no small thing. If they were scanning the humans, it meant one of two things. Either they were identifying them as prey or preparing to destroy them outright. Zira forced herself to speak. "You have to run." Captain Reed turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Run." "You don't understand," she said, her voice urgent. "My people do not take prisoners. They do not negotiate. If they think you have me, they will kill you. You need to leave me behind." Reed didn't flinch. Not happening. Zyra's heart pounded. She didn't understand. She had spent her life being ignored, discarded, treated as unworthy. But these humans, who owed her nothing, refused to abandon her. "Why?" she demanded. "Why would you risk your lives for me?" Reed met her gaze, his eyes steady. "Because we're human." And that was it. That was the only answer he gave. As if it was so simple. As if there was no other option in their minds. The Zentari demand blood. The ship's comm crackled. A deep, guttural voice filled the air, layered with the eerie harmonics of the Zentari language. "This is Commander Vectol of the Zentari Imperial Fleet. You have something that belongs to us." Zyra shivered. She recognized that name. Vectol was a warlord, a high-ranking enforcer of the Empire. Ruthless, efficient, unforgiving. The humans exchanged glances. Captain Reed stepped forward and pressed a button on the console. "This is Captain Reed of the UH at Valkyrie. State your purpose. You have taken a Zentari. You will release her immediately, or your ship will be destroyed." Zyra's breath caught. This was it. This was how the humans would die. But instead of fear, Captain Reed just sighed. Rubbing his temple like this was an annoyance. Then, in the most casual tone, he responded, "Yeah, that's not gonna happen." Zyra's eyes widened. "What?" The silence on the other end of the comm was thick with disbelief. "You dare defy the Zentari?" Vectol's voice was quieter now, but far more dangerous. Reed leaned forward. "Buddy, I don't even know who you are. But if you think you can just order us around, you're in for a surprise." Zyra couldn't believe what she was hearing. This human, this insane human, was mocking a Zentari warlord. "Captain," she whispered, "you don't understand. The Zentari do not bluff. If you defy them, they will." "They'll what?" Reed interrupted. "Kill us? Try it." A cold chill ran through Zyra's body. The humans, they weren't afraid. They were ready. The impossible choice. The comm crackled again. "You have 1 minute to comply," Vectol growled. Zyra turned to Reed, panic rising. "Please, you don't understand what's coming. You can't win against them. No one does." Reed met her gaze and smiled. "That's funny," he said, "because that's what people used to say about us." And then he turned to his crew. "Shields up. Prepare for evasive maneuvers. The humans were going to fight." Zyra stared at them in horror. It was suicide. The Zentari were stronger, faster, superior in every way. And yet, these humans were not running. She had spent her entire life believing one truth, that her people were the peak of evolution, the strongest in the galaxy. But as she watched the humans, something inside her began to shift. Maybe her people had been wrong. The battle begins. Outside the ship, the Zentari warship loomed, its black metal hull gleaming under the dying red sky. It was massive, a predator in the void, its weapons locking onto the Valkyrie with precision. "Incoming fire," someone shouted. A blast of energy shot from the Zentari ship, screaming through the air. But the Valkyrie moved, not with brute force, but with agility. Zyra gasped as the human ship danced. It twisted and spun, dodging the blasts with impossible precision. The Zentari did not fight this way. They relied on overwhelming power, crushing enemies under sheer might. But humans fought differently. They were unpredictable. The moment that changed everything. For the first time, Zyra saw something she had never seen before. Zentari hesitation. The warship faltered, its pilots thrown off by the humans' movements. Reed's voice was calm. "Target their engines. Disable, don't destroy. Firing now." A pulse of blue light shot from the Valkyrie. It struck the Zentari ship's engines dead center. Sparks exploded. The great warship lurched. Zyra's breath caught. They hit them. They actually hit them. The comm crackled one last time. "This isn't over," Vectol snarled. Then, the Zentari ship jumped away. They had retreated. A new truth. Silence filled the ship. The humans had just done the impossible. They had forced a Zentari warship to retreat. Zyra couldn't breathe. Everything she had believed, everything she had been taught, was falling apart. She turned to Reed. You just fought a Zentari warship and won." Reed grinned. "Welcome to humanity." And in that moment, Zyra understood. Her people had feared humans for the wrong reason. It wasn't their weapons. It wasn't their strength. It was because humans never gave up. And now, she was one of them. The betrayal of the Zentari. The ship's engines hummed softly, a rhythmic pulse that echoed in the quiet corridors of the Valkyrie. The battle was over, but the tension still lingered in the air like the last embers of a dying fire. Zyra sat in the corner of the med bay, her mind racing. The humans had fought a Zentari warship, and won. That should have been impossible. But it had happened. Her body still ached from years of weakness, but her mind was sharper than ever. She could not stop replaying the moment in her head, how the humans moved, how they reacted, how they defied every rule of war she had been taught. Zentari did not retreat. Zentari did not hesitate. Zentari did not fear. And yet, a Zentari warship had run from humans. The truth she could not ignore. Captain Reed stepped into the room, his expression unreadable. He studied her for a moment before leaning against the wall. "You look like someone who just saw a ghost." Zyra hesitated, then spoke. "My people, they were supposed to be the strongest." Reed smirked. "Strongest doesn't mean smartest." She looked at him sharply, but there was no arrogance in his tone, just fact. She swallowed hard. The Zentari do not respect weakness. They should have crushed you. Reed crossed his arms, but they didn't. "No," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "They didn't." And that terrified her. Her entire life, she had been raised to believe the Zentari Empire was unchallenged, the peak of civilization. But now she wasn't sure anymore. Something was happening, something no one in the Empire had ever prepared for. The warning that came too late. The ship's comm crackled to life. "Captain," a voice called from the bridge. "We're picking up a new signal. It's a distress beacon." Reed straightened. "Source." There was a pause. Then the voice on the other end spoke again, but this time there was uncertainty. "It's Zintari." Thidera froze. Reed met her gaze. "You know anything about this?" She shook her head. "No. My people do not send distress signals. If a ship is lost, it is considered weak. No rescue. No second chances." Reed frowned. Then why would a Zintari ship send one now? There was only one answer. "They are afraid," she whispered. For the first time in history, the Zintari were afraid. A trap in the dark. Reed wasted no time. "We're checking it out. Helm, set a course." The ship shifted, accelerating toward the distress signal. The Valkyrie was fast, sleek, and human-made. It did not take long before they reached the source. Through the viewing screen, Syra saw the wreckage of a Zintari cruiser, its once majestic hull torn open like an animal carcass. Pieces of metal drifted through space, sparks flickering in the void. "It's a warship," one of the crew muttered. "But who did this?" Zyra's hands clenched into fists. "Nothing is strong enough to do this to a Zintari ship." Reed didn't answer. He was already analyzing the readings. "Something's not right," he murmured. "This isn't just wreckage. This ship was ripped apart from the inside." Zyra's blood ran cold. "Sir," the comms officer suddenly shouted, "we're detecting life signs. Someone's still alive in there." Reed didn't hesitate. "We're going in." A message from the dying. The boarding shuttle docked against the ruined ship, and a small team of humans stepped inside, weapons at the ready. Zyra followed, her heart pounding. The inside of the Zintari cruiser was silent. Too silent. No alarms, no movement, no signs of battle. Just emptiness. Then they found him. A Zintari warrior, barely clinging to life, slumped against the cold metal floor. His armor was scorched, his breathing ragged. His violet eyes flickered open, and when he saw Zyra, they widened in shock. "Princess," he rasped. Zyra knelt beside him. "What happened?" He coughed, dark blood dripping from his lips. His voice trembled with fear. They came out of nowhere. They weren't human. They weren't anything I've seen before." Reed's expression darkened. "Who attacked you?" The warrior's hands shook. "We were ordered to hunt you. The Empire. They wanted you dead." Zyra stiffened. "They sent you to kill me." The warrior swallowed hard. "The Emperor, he said you were a disgrace, that you sided with the humans. You are no longer one of us." Zyra's world shattered. Her people had not just abandoned her. They had erased her. She had no home, no people, no empire. She had nothing. And yet she did. She turned her gaze to Reed and the other humans. They weren't her kind, but they had saved her. They had fought for her. They had given her something the Zintari never had. A choice. She met Reed's gaze, and for the first time in her life, she knew exactly where she belonged. Her people had betrayed her, but she had found a new people now. And they were called humans. The truth the galaxy must face. The dying warrior's breath grew weaker. "You don't understand," he whispered. "The Empire is afraid, not just of humans, but of something else." Syra leaned closer. "What do you mean?" His eyes flickered with terror. "They are coming," he choked out. "Not humans, not us. Something worse." And then he was gone. Dead. A heavy silence fell over the humans. Captain Reed exhaled slowly. "So the Zintari aren't as invincible as they think." Zyra shook her head. "No, they are not. But if the Zintari Empire was afraid..." Then what could possibly be strong enough to make them fear? Humans fight the impossible battle. The cold silence of space pressed against the hull of the Valkyrie, but inside, the ship pulsed with urgency. The weight of the dying Centauri warrior's last words hung in the air like a storm cloud. They are coming. Not humans. Not us. Something worse. Zyra sat in the war room alongside Captain Reed and his crew. The holographic table in front of them displayed the wreckage of the Centauri warship, still drifting lifelessly in space. But that wasn't the part that sent chills through her bones. It was the readings. Something else had been here. Something not Centauri. This doesn't make sense, Tyra murmured, staring at the screen. No species has ever been able to destroy a Centauri warship like this. They were torn apart from the inside. That means... Reed nodded grimly. That means whatever killed them was already on the ship. Silence. Then, Dr. Hayes spoke up. If something boarded them, where is it now? A shiver ran down Zyra's spine. That was the real question. Because whatever had killed the Centauri was gone. The first warning. The ship's alarms blared. Captain, one of the bridge officers shouted over the comms. We have multiple contacts. Unknown vessels dropping out of FTL. Reed's head snapped up. How many? There was a pause. Then, the officer's voice came through, tight with disbelief. 17. No, 20. Zyra's heart clenched. That's an invasion force. The screen flickered, and suddenly, they saw them. The ships that emerged from the void were unlike anything she had ever seen. They were dark, jagged things, twisting as if alive. Their surfaces seemed to pulse, shifting like liquid metal. They bore no insignia, no markings, no familiar patterns of war. They were completely alien. Even the Centauri, with all their arrogance, had never spoken of a species like this. Reed's jaw tightened, weapons hot, shields up. The bridge came alive with movement, humans scrambling to battle stations, preparing for the fight ahead. Zyra could only stare at the alien fleet, her stomach twisting with unease. And then, the creatures spoke. The voices in the dark. A sound filled the comms. It wasn't words. It was a feeling. Cold. Endless. Hungry. The sound slithered into their minds, pressing against their thoughts like a whisper from the abyss. Zyra gasped as it coiled around her mind, filling her with an overwhelming sense of emptiness. She felt small. She felt insignificant. She felt as if something ancient had just noticed her. Reed slammed his fist against the console. Shut it off. The comms officer frantically cut the transmission, and just like that, the pressure lifted. The bridge was silent, every human looking around as if making sure they were still themselves. What the hell was that? One of the crew whispered. Zyra shook her head, breath unsteady. That was not a message. Dr. Hayes swallowed hard. Then what was it? Zyra looked at them, her voice barely above a whisper. A warning. The attack begins. The alien ships move fast. Too fast. The first blasts came without warning, bolts of black energy that bent through space, warping toward the Valkyrie like living creatures. Incoming fire. The ship rocked as the shields flared, struggling to absorb the impact. Zyra gripped the edge of the table, eyes wide. The Centauri would have panicked. They would have run. But the humans, they fought. Return fire. Reed barked. The Valkyrie struck back, human cannons roaring with brilliant blue light. The shots tore through the darkness, hitting the alien ships, but something was wrong. The blasts vanished. Zyra's stomach dropped. It's absorbing the energy. The aliens were learning. And fast. Switch to kinetic rounds. Reed ordered. Hit them with everything. The ship's turrets adjusted, shifting to solid metal slugs. They fired again. This time, the impact was real. One of the alien ships shattered. The humans roared in victory. But the aliens, they adapted. The next wave of black energy twisted, curving around the Valkyrie's shields, striking the hull directly. A console exploded. Sparks flew. "We've lost engines." Reed's grip tightened on the console, but his voice remained steady. "Damage control teams, move now." Zaira could hardly breathe. The humans were outmatched. The enemy was changing mid-battle, twisting and adapting to every attack. This wasn't a war. It was a test. The aliens weren't just fighting. They were learning. The impossible decision. We need an escape route. There is none. Zaira's mind raced. The humans wouldn't survive another wave. She had to do something. Her gaze flicked to the wreckage outside. The ruined Zentari warship. An idea formed. A dangerous, reckless idea. "Captain," she said urgently, "we can use the Zentari ship." Reed blinked. "That ship's dead." "Not entirely," she countered. "If I can access its emergency systems, I can activate its self-destruct." The humans paused. It was insane. It was suicidal. And yet, Reed smiled. "Crazy plan," he said. "I like it." The final gamble. With no time to waste, Zaira and a small team of humans boarded the dead Zentari ship. The corridors were dark, littered with bodies of its former crew. The enemy had been here. She shivered, pushing forward. They reached the control panel. It was still active, barely. Zaira's fingers flew across the interface, overriding security systems. A countdown appeared. 5 minutes until detonation. She turned to the humans. "We need to go. Now." They'd raced back to the shuttle, launching just as the alien ships realized what was happening. The Valkyrie was waiting, engines straining. "Punch it," Reed roared. The ship jumped just as the Zentari warship exploded. The shockwave engulfed the alien fleet. For the first time, the creatures hesitated. And then, just as suddenly as they had arrived, they vanished. A new enemy, a new war. The bridge was silent. They had survived. But Zaira knew the truth. The battle was over. The war had just begun. She turned to Reed. "They'll be back." He met her gaze, unwavering. Good. For the first time in her life, Zaira did not feel weak. She felt ready. Because she had learned one thing about humans. They never stopped fighting. And neither would she. When hope was lost, the Valkyrie drifted in the void, its once pristine hull scarred and blackened from the battle. Inside, the silence was thick, broken only by the hum of emergency power and the occasional flicker of failing lights. They had survived, but just barely. Zaira stood on the bridge, staring at the empty space where the alien fleet had been. They had vanished without a trace, as if they had never existed, and that terrified her more than the battle itself. Because the Zentari never spoke of an enemy stronger than themselves, because no species had ever made them afraid. And yet here she was, alive because of humans. Humans who, despite being outmatched, refused to die. Captain Reed leaned over the console, wiping blood from a cut on his forehead. His crew moved around him, their exhaustion showing, but their spirits unbroken. "Damage report?" he asked. A woman at the console, Lieutenant Harris, Zaira had learned, sighed. "Shields are fried. Hull integrity at 40%. One of our engines is toast. We won't be jumping anywhere soon." Reed exhaled slowly. Could be worse. Harris gave him a look. Could it? Reed smirked, but it was tired. "We're still breathing, aren't we?" Zaira felt something stir in her chest. No panic, no fear, just determination. That was the human way, a choice no one should have to make. Dr. Hayes stepped onto the bridge, shaking her head. "Med bay is full. We lost 5. Another 10 are critical. I don't have the supplies to treat them." Zaira flinched. 5. 5 humans dead. Because of her. She clenched her fists, guilt clawing at her. If the humans had never found her, never taken her in, those 5 would still be alive. She turned to Reed, forcing herself to stand tall. "Captain, you should have left me behind." The bridge went silent. Reed looked up at her, his expression unreadable. Then he scoffed. "That's the dumbest thing I've heard all day." Cyrus' throat tightened. "Because of me, your people." Reed held up a hand. "Stop. Just stop. You think you're the reason those 5 are dead. Am I not?" Reed leaned forward, his voice steady. "You think we took you in because we expected something in return." She didn't answer. He shook his head. "We saved you because that's what we do, not because you were useful, not because we needed something from you, but because you were left behind, and we don't do that." Zara swallowed hard. "You think those 5 wouldn't have made the same choice?" Reed continued. "They died fighting for something bigger than themselves. That's what being human means." Her chest ached with emotions she didn't fully understand. She had spent her whole life being told she was worthless. But here, in this broken human ship, she had been given something she never expected. A place to belong. The Emperor's message. The comms crackled. "Sir," Harris said, "we're receiving a transmission." Reed frowned. "From who?" Harris hesitated. "Zintari. High Command." Devira's breath caught. Reed nodded. "Put it through." The holographic screen flickered to life, and a towering figure appeared, Emperor Valsith, ruler of the Zintari Empire. His black eyes burned with cold authority. His robes shimmered like liquid obsidian, a symbol of the Empire's eternal rule. He stared at Tyra for a long moment. "You are alive." Syrah forced herself to meet his gaze. "No thanks to you." The Emperor did not react. Instead, his attention shifted to Reed. "You have taken what does not belong to you, human." Reed crossed his arms. "You mean the princess you left for dead?" "She is Zintari," the Emperor said. "That means she is ours, and she will be executed for her betrayal." Zyra's heart pounded. "Betrayal? You aligned yourself with the enemy," the Emperor said coolly. "You sided with them." Zyra's blood turned to ice. This wasn't just about her. The Zintari were terrified of humans. And now, they were making sure no one else sided with them. Reed smirked. "So let me get this straight. You abandoned her, tried to kill her, and now that she survived, you're calling her a traitor." The Emperor's voice was like a blade. "Return her, or your species will burn." A slow, amused smile spread across Reed's face. "You're scared." Zyra's breath caught. The Emperor stiffened. "You overestimate yourselves." "Do I?" Reed leaned forward. "Because I've seen your warships. I've seen what's left of your soldiers, and I've heard your distress calls. You're running from something, and you don't know how to stop it." The Emperor's face remained stone, but something flickered in his expression. Zyra saw it. Doubt. Fear. "You're losing control," Reed continued, his voice calm but deadly. "The Zintari Empire is cracking. And it's not because of us, it's because of them." Silence. Then the Emperor leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Xeris. "You are no longer Zintari." The word struck like a physical blow. "You have chosen humanity," the Emperor continued, "and they will die for it." The transmission cut. "The war begins." Zyra exhaled shakily. Reed turned to her. "You okay?" She nodded slowly. "I am now." Because for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of the Zintari. She was against them, and she wasn't alone. Reed straightened. "All right, people. We've got an empire that wants us dead, and an alien race we don't understand. So what do we do?" The humans looked at each other. Then one of them grinned. "We fight." Zyra smiled. Yes, they fought. And they never stopped. The ultimate sacrifice. The Valkyrie hung in the void, its hull scarred, its systems barely holding together. The humans had fought, bled, and survived. But survival wasn't enough anymore. The Zintari Empire had declared war. And worse, the unknown enemy, the one that had shattered a Zintari warship as if it were nothing, was still out there. Zyra stood on the bridge, watching the flickering stars. She had made her choice. She was no longer Zintari. The Emperor himself had cast her out, condemned her as a traitor. But she didn't feel lost anymore. She felt free. And now she would fight, not for an empire that had abandoned her, but for the humans who had saved her. Captain Reed stepped up beside her, arms crossed as he stared into the darkness of space. "You okay?" Zyra nodded. "Better than I've ever been." Reed smirked. "Good, because we got a problem." A war on two fronts. Lieutenant Harris turned from her console, her face grim. "We just intercepted a Zintari transmission." Reed nodded. "Let's hear it." The message played over the speakers, static-filled, distorted, but the words were clear. "The human threat has spread beyond control. They must be eradicated at all costs. All Zintari fleets are to mobilize, burn their colonies, cripple their fleets. Humanity must not be allowed to rise." Silence. Zyra clenched her fists. The Zintari were making their move. "They fear us," she whispered. "They wouldn't be doing this if they didn't." Reed exhaled slowly. "Yeah. And now, we're officially in a war." Harris swallowed. "Captain, that's not all. The transmission wasn't just an order. It was also a distress call." Zyra frowned. "From where?" Harris hesitated. "From Zintari Prime." Zyra's breath caught. The capital of the Zintari Empire, one of the most heavily fortified planets in the galaxy, and it was sending a distress call. Reed straightened. "Patch it through." The speakers crackled again, and then, screaming. Not battle cries, not orders, but pure terror. "They are inside." "We." A deep, ragged breath. A voice, desperate. Asterisk. "They are learning, adapting, changing. We can't stop." A shriek. A wet, crunching sound. Then silence. The message cut off. No one spoke. Zyra felt something cold slither down her spine. The Zintari weren't invading humanity. They were fleeing. The impossible mission. Reed turned to his crew. "What are we looking at?" Harris' hands flew across her console. "We have long-range scans. Captain, Zintari Prime is under siege. Half their fleet is destroyed." She swallowed. "And it's not by us." Reed rubbed his face. "Damn it." Dr. Hayes frowned. "So let me get this straight. The Zintari want to burn our people alive, but at the same time, they're getting their own heads ripped off by something." Reed nodded. "Pretty much." Zyra stepped forward. "We need to go there." All heads turned to her. Reed raised an eyebrow. "To Zintari Prime, the same place that just put a kill order on you." Zyra met his gaze. "If we don't figure out what's happening, we're next. The Zintari are strong, but something is tearing through them like they're nothing. That same enemy will come for humanity." She turned to the view screen, staring at the endless black. "And we won't survive if we don't understand what we're up against." Reed sighed, rubbing his temple. "I really hate it when you make sense." Then he turned to the crew. "Prep the engines. We're going to Zintari Prime." The graveyard of a civilization. The Valkyrie arrived at the edge of the Zintari homeworld hours later. And what they saw stole their breath. The once mighty Zintari Prime was a graveyard. Their defense fleets, gone. Their towering cities, ruins. Massive black tendrils coiled through the burning skyline, writhing, moving. And in the heart of it all, the creatures stood. Zyra's mouth went dry. They weren't ships. They weren't soldiers. They were evolving. Some had thick armored plating. Some had spindly limbs that bent in unnatural ways. Others hovered, their forms shifting, mouths splitting open in silent screams. They were adapting. Reed exhaled. Well, that's horrifying. Harris swallowed. Sir, we have multiple life signs on the planet. Survivors. Syra's heart pounded. We need to get them out. Reed stared at the screen. We go in, we might not come back. Syra lifted her chin. Humans never leave their own behind, right? Reed chuckled, shaking his head. Damn right. Then his expression hardened. Gear up. We're going in. The final stand. They landed in the middle of chaos. The city was burning. The air was thick with smoke, the sky darkened by shifting alien shapes. The moment the humans stepped onto the ground, the creatures noticed. Their heads snapped toward the intruders. And then they charged. Gunfire erupted. Bullets tore through the creatures, but they didn't die. Not fully. They regrew. They're learning. Hayes shouted, "We need bigger weapons." Reed gritted his teeth. Then let's give them something to learn from. He pulled a small device from his belt, pressed a button, and the ground erupted in fire. Explosives sent the creatures flying, limbs scattering. But they twitched, moved, began to pull themselves back together. Zyra's blood ran cold. They're changing. Faster. Reed grabbed his comm. Harris, we need an evac. Now. But before Harris could respond, a shadow fell over them. One of the massive creatures, the size of a building, dropped from the sky, its body shifting, molding itself into something stronger, something built to kill them. Its eyes locked onto Reed. It moved, faster than anything that size should move. Zyra's breath caught. Reed wasn't going to make it. There was no time to think, no time to doubt. She moved, threw herself into the captain, shoving him out of the way. And the creature struck. Agony. Its claws tore through her side. She barely registered the pain. She hit the ground, blood pooling beneath her, but she smiled. Because Reed was still standing. Because the humans would still fight. Because she had chosen this. As her vision faded, she heard Reed's voice. Fierce, unyielding. Get her to the ship. Now. Darkness swallowed her. The legend of the crippled princess and the human miracle. The pain was distant now, swallowed by darkness. Zara drifted in and out of consciousness, her mind flickering between past and present. She saw the gleaming halls of the Centauri Palace, cold, cruel, unforgiving. The place where she had been nothing. Then she saw the humans, their fire, their stubbornness, their refusal to surrender even in the face of impossible odds. She had spent her life believing the Centauri were the greatest species in the galaxy. But now, as she lay bleeding on a battlefield that was not her own, surrounded by humans who refused to leave her behind, she knew the truth. The humans were the greatest. Not because they were the strongest, but because they never stopped fighting. And neither would she. A sudden jolt of pain pulled her back to reality. Her eyes fluttered open, and she saw the ceiling of the Valkyrie's med bay. Harsh lights burned above her. She felt the cold sting of medical gel seeping into her wounds. Voices echoed in the background. She's stable, but barely. We need to get out of here before those things realize we're still alive. Then, a familiar voice. Rough, determined, alive. Captain Reed. She saved my life. His voice was quieter now, almost unreadable. I'm not letting her die for it. Zyra's throat felt dry, but she forced out a whisper. Then don't. A silence fell over the room. Then, to her utter shock, Reed laughed. Damn stubborn alien, he muttered, shaking his head. You're gonna fit in just fine. The final stand. The Valkyrie shuddered. Something was wrong. Reed turned toward the comms. Harris, status. The reply was immediate. The creatures, they're coming back. Zira pushed herself upright, ignoring the fire in her side. Then we finish this. The crew exchanged glances. She wasn't just some abandoned Centauri princess anymore. She was one of them. Reed nodded. All right. We end this. The plan that shouldn't have worked. Harris pulled up a holographic display. The creatures aren't just attacking randomly. They're forming a hive mind. They adapt because they share everything they learn. Zyra's breath caught. Then we need to cut off the head. Hayes frowned. You mean? Zyra nodded. We take out their leader. Whatever is controlling them. Reed grinned. I like the way you think. Harris looked uneasy. Even if we find the leader, we don't have the firepower to. Reed held up a finger. But we do. Everyone stared at him. Reed smirked. We've got a Centauri warship reactor sitting in the wreckage outside. If we overload it and turn it into a bomb, we can wipe out the whole hive. Zyra blinked. That's insane. Reed grinned wider. Yeah, I know. She smiled back. The plan was madness. It shouldn't have worked. But humans had a habit of doing the impossible. The final battle. They moved fast. The team infiltrated the ruins of Centauri Prime under heavy fire. The creatures sensed what they were doing, their bodies twisting and warping into new forms to counter human tactics. But it wasn't enough. Because humans had something the creatures didn't. Creativity. Reed led the charge, dodging through enemy fire with a reckless grin. Zyra, using the exoskeleton the humans had built for her, fought beside him. Not a crippled princess, not a discarded outcast, but a warrior. They reached the warship wreckage, bypassed the shattered security systems, and hacked into the reactor core. Harris' voice came through the comms. Detonation sequence online. 60 seconds. They ran. The creatures roared behind them, but it was too late. The Valkyrie lifted off just as the explosion ignited. A wave of blinding white energy ripped through the city. The hive mind screamed. Dozens, then hundreds, then thousands of creatures froze mid-movement before collapsing like puppets with their strings cut. Zyra watched from the viewport, breathing hard. It was over. A new beginning. They returned to human space victorious. The Centauri Empire was crippled. The creatures, gone. The humans had done what the most powerful empire in the galaxy could not. Zyra stood beside Reed on the bridge, watching the stars pass by. What happens now? She asked. Reed smirked. Now, we go home. Zyra turned to him. I don't have a home. Reed's smile softened. Yeah, you do, he said. You're one of us now. And for the first time in her life. She believed it, because humans never leave their own behind. And now, neither would she. Epilogue. The legend begins. Years later, across the galaxy, they would tell the story. The story of a crippled alien princess, of a people who refused to abandon her, of the humans who did the impossible, and of the battle where everything changed. Zyra, once a forgotten outcast, became a legend, not as a Centauri, but as something far greater, a human.